Library. Today's video is a little bit different. It's not a book review, but it's a review on all fairy tales. So it's basically an origins and how they originated, who wrote them, what the story's actually about, and how it's changed through different adaptations, mainly Disney. Okay, so Cinderella. Okay, so the true story of Cinderella is, are you ready? Because it's not the same. So the Disney adaptation of Cinderella is Cinderella's mother dies when she's only small. Her father then lives on his own with her. He's a widower. He has a good job where he goes off and travels and collects things on his travels and brings them back for her, but he's gone away for quite a long time. So her father then decides to remarry her evil stepmother. And marrying her evil stepmother, she takes upon two evil stepsisters. Though they're not horrible to her when her father's around, they're not exactly very nice. So Lady Hermione and her daughters Drizella and Anastasia start to become cruel to Cinderella when her father would go off on his adventures. She would then start cleaning the house and just, you know, maintaining it like you do. And then her father tragically dies, doesn't return to her, and she's left alone with her evil stepmother and horrible, ugly stepsisters. And although they're portrayed as ugly looking, they're more in the Disney version as ugly personalities. Although Anastasia turns out to be okay in the end, in the next version, they're not very nice to her, so that's why you get the evil stepsisters, ugly stepsisters, whatever. So her father goes off and she then starts to become a servant in her own home, until one day she goes to the prince's ball. Now she can't go to the prince's ball just sat there like in what she's wearing because she doesn't look very good. She then gets a fairy godmother. So the fairy godmother then grants her her wishes, and that is to go to the ball. So she gives her a beautiful, beautiful dress. She gives her a pumpkin that turns into a carriage. Liz is a footman, and the mice as the horses, and etc, etc. And these beautiful glass slippers, though I don't know how she would walk in them. But they turn into these beautiful glass slippers, and she goes to the ball. But the catch is, clock goes to 12. The point of the story of Eddie adaptation that you've learned from Cinderella, if it follows the main rules, is her mother dies, father remarries, turns into a servant, finds the prince, loses her glass slipper, prince finds her, and they marry. So there's the 5 key fundamental plots that you have to have within the story that creates the Cinderella story. Now the real story. So Charles Perrault's version, when the prince arrives at Cinderella's house, the stepmother orders her 2 daughters to cut off their toes and put on the slippers. Ew. Her plan does not work, obviously, and Cinderella gets a happy ending with the prince. To add insult to injury during the wedding, some pigeons devour the eyes of her already mutated stepsisters. So it looks as though the stepmother doesn't get anything bad happen to her, but the stepsisters seem to have no toes and now have no eyes. Next one, Sleeping Beauty.
I know you, I walked with you once upon a dream.
A princess pricks her finger on a spindle wheel and goes to an endless sleep. So it starts off where this little baby is born, and her name is Aurora, and she's the most beautiful little baby that anybody's ever seen. And the king and queen, her mother and father, decide to hold like a christening. Okay, so they invite all the fairies, which happen to be 3 fairies that are sisters, and they're Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather. So they are the fairies that are invited to her christening. And they all give her something. So one is beauty, I think one is intelligence, and as the other one is about, the blue fairy, is about to give her wish, Maleficent arrives. And again, whatever adaptation you've watched, Maleficent is seen as the bad fairy. And I'm sorry, but I would be pretty upset if I wasn't invited to a christening, but all my other little fairy people were. And if you've ever seen Maleficent, you'll see that she's actually not as bad as, you know, everyone makes it out. But I would be very upset if I was invited. Especially, like, you know, if you were just as good as the other fairies. But hey, back to the story. So she arrives and she's like, you have not invited me to the christening. And they're all looking at her like, oh my god. They're all really scared because they think she's going to now curse the baby. But obviously it's their fault because she may not have cursed the baby if she was bloody invited. If she was invited, they may have just said, hey, have some birthday cake, a christening cake. And she'd be like, thank you very much, and then left. She may have then come back and hated them, but at least, like, she would have had a good time. So anyway, she stands with her staff and her raven and the green smoke around her. And she then curses the baby that on her 16th birthday she'll prick her finger on a spindle wheel and die. Okay. So the blue fairy's standing there like, Maleficent disappears, and she's like, I'm going to grant her the fact that she will prick her finger because she can't apparently change what the wish has been, what the magic has done. So she then says that she will prick her finger at 16, she will not die, but she will sleep for 1,000 years until a handsome prince will kiss her. She then, depends on again the adaptation, she then makes every single person in the palace fall asleep as well, so that they will all be the same age, they'll all still wake up with her when she wakes. And then the fairies take that prince, or they find the prince, depending on the story, and he then goes and he slays the vines outside the palace, goes inside, he slays the dragon, which is Maleficent, and he kisses Aurora, and she awakens from her slumber, and she then falls in love with the prince, and they marry. And that's the end of the story. However, the real story, in the Guyan Bastia version, Aurora is not woken with a sweet kiss, but with the birth of her twins. Not to forget, the prince doesn't kiss her, he gets her pregnant, then leaves because he's married. Okay. When Aurora and her children arrive at the palace, the prince's wife tries to kill them, but the king stops her and he allows her to marry the prince. That story is so completely different that it just seems like it's not the same story. I mean, at least with Cinderella, it still had the same thing, it was just the ending was different. I mean, this one, it's the whole story is different. I mean, Prince Philip's not a nice person, and then Aurora's innocent, but then she wants to marry him. But let's just sort of push that away and just think of the Disney one. Okay, the next story is Beauty and the Beast.
A little scared, neither one prepared, beyond the Beast.
Okay, so the story of Beauty and the Beast is, again, depending on the adaptation. The Disney version is, which is the easiest one for me to explain, is there's this girl who lives in this poor provincial town, and she actually wants to become more. I mean, I agree with her, okay? You want to be more than what you are, you have all these hobbies, these ambitions, and you want to be better than what you are. Now, I know that people have criticised this song quite a few times by saying, okay, what's wrong with the town, what's wrong with the people? And there's that funny meme where she's like, there goes the baker with the same bread, and he's just standing there like, oh, what's wrong with my bread bell? Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't mean it in that way, and I don't think bell means in that way. She just means that she doesn't want to be in that town and be who they are. She wants more. Especially with Gaston saying that the wife should be in the kitchen. She doesn't want to do that. I'm not saying she doesn't want to be in the kitchen because she's in the kitchen looking after her dad, but she wants to go and have adventures like she does in her books. And then there's always like these theories whether she should have actually married Aladdin because he's the one that has the adventures and the sword fights. But again, that's another story. That's like a complete thing. That's called the Pixar and Disney and Marvel and Universe, how everything's connected or whatever. And I've seen them by like the Super Carlin brothers, and they're really, really cool. So check them out. They're really good. They do lots of theories. So yeah, check them out. So she's in this town and she hates it. So she wants more. So she reads all these fairy tales and these books and adventures and whatever, and she lives with her father who makes these things, who's an inventor. And one day her father goes off and he has this invention that he wants to show this community. So he goes on his travels to find them, to find this town and to show them his invention. And it starts to snow and blizzard, and there's these wolves, and he finds this magical castle. He enters the castle, He enters the castle and he meets Mrs. Potts and Chip and Lemur and Cogsworth and everybody else in the palace, and he sits there and he has his cup of tea and he's all happy, and then the beast appears, locks him up in the tower and says that he's going to be there forever and die. So then Belle, the horse comes back, Philippe, and she sees the horse and she's like, oh my god, where's my father? She gets on the back of Philippe, travels to where her father was, which happens to be again this castle. She then goes inside the castle, finds her father, the beast then scares her. She then says, replace me instead of my father. Father then goes off, Belle stays. Throughout her experience, she hates the beast, and then she slowly starts to care for the beast. Not necessarily in a romantic way, but she starts to care for the beast. She then starts to fall in love with the beast, and I think the moral of the story is, just because you look horrible, hideous and ghastly and beastly, depending again on the adaptation, because I think Disney version he doesn't look too bad, you know, you fall in love with the personality. And I'm not saying that she loved the beast in a romantic way, because how could she have been with the beast, but she did fall in love with the beast, and that's the point of the story. And he has this magical rose, and every time a petal drops it gets closer and closer to, I think it's his 21st birthday, and when he gets to his 21st birthday, and when he hits 21, he'll stay as a beast forever, unless he can find somebody that will love him throughout his beastly form. So Belle falls in love with him, and the spell breaks. Okay, so the real story. Gabrielle Susan Bardot de Villeneuve. Belle convinces the beast to let her visit her sisters for a week. Okay, so she's got sisters now. Upon seeing her covered in jewellery and hearing about her luxurious life, sisters then convince Belle to stay longer with them, with the intention that the delay will make the beast mad and he will kill Belle. That's not very nice, is it, really? Like, the sisters were jealous, and then the beast would be angry and come and hurt Belle. Now, I do remember a long, long time ago watching something like this. It was a Beauty and the Beast, but it's very different to Disney. So, although the story is still different, there's still the Beauty and the Beast love, and that's so great. So, out of all of them at the moment, I think that's my Snow White.
I'm wishing for the one I love to find.
Okay, so Snow White's only crime was she was the fairest of them all. Her father remarries, who's the king, and he marries this woman who believes that she's the most beautiful person in the world, and her mirror agrees with her. Snow White then, I don't know what their relationship's like when Snow White's small, but I'm assuming it's just like, okay. But Snow White eventually turns into this beautiful, beautiful woman, and her stepmother is so jealous of her and envious, and she sends this huntsman out to get Snow White and to take her heart and kill her. So Huntsman does that, except he doesn't take her heart, he takes it from a pig and takes it back to the Queen because he couldn't hurt her because she was only a young girl. I think she's only 14. She's back, the Queen is happy, and then one day she turns to the mirror and she says, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's fairest of them all? And she sees Snow White. And Snow White at this point is living with the 7 dwarves. And then one day this old lady comes to the door. It's a comb, she has a corset, and then it's an apple. I don't know if I'm missing something. If I'm missing something, I'm sorry. Remind me below if I've missed something. And the comb basically goes inside her head and poisons her. Okay? And then the dwarves come home and they remove the comb and they're like, oh my god, you don't answer the door. Next one is a corset. This old lady's selling these corsets. She puts the corset on, it's so tight that she stops being able to breathe. Old lady disappears. Dwarves come back. Same thing. The last time is a poisonous apple. And they don't know what's actually happened to her, so they believe that she is actually dead. So they put her in a glass coffin out in the woods, and one day Prince Charming is on his way, and he sees her in this coffin and thinks, wow, she's the fairest of them all. And he removes the coffin and he kisses her, and through kissing her the poison disappears and she wakes up and she's like, I love you, and then they get married. So that's the story of Snow White. Now, the true story by the Brothers Grimm, Professor Grimm are great. The witch doesn't die under a rock. I can't remember how the witch dies in Snow White, actually. Let me find out. Once Snow White is rescued, the dwarves chase her up into the mountains and she goes behind a boulder and hides away. Lightning strikes, she rolls down the hill with the boulder and dies, and you hear this scream. So in the true story, the queen doesn't die, the queen/witch doesn't die under a rock. She's made to dance in heated iron shoes until she faints and dies. As much as she deserves that, it's not nice. And in this thing called the 10th Kingdom, I don't know if you've seen it, there's a scene where they make her dance in these shoes. It's not the same thing, so I don't know why I've said it, but it just reminded me of that. Okay, the next one is A Little Mermaid.
Love to explore that shore up above, out of the sea. Wish I could be part of that world.
Now, I love Beauty and the Beast. The Little Mermaid is by far my favourite Disney film. I absolutely love it. So Ariel is the daughter of King Titan. She lives in the underwater world of Atlantis, or Atlantia, and she has a best friend called Flounder, who's a fish, a guppy, and she has a to-be best friend called Sebastian, who is a crab, and he sings happening above her. She goes up and she saves this prince called Eric. She takes him to shore. He kind of sees her, but she sees him and she falls in love with him. She then heads off to the shipwreck and she finds a statue of him. She puts it in her little underwater cave that she keeps all her little things, like her fork that she thinks is a hairbrush and so on. Father then finds out about it. He basically tells her she can never ever see the humans ever again, because we then find out later on that her mother actually died because of the humans. But she doesn't know this, only her father does. So anyway, she heads off and she finds this sea witch called Ursula. She then basically gives her legs in exchange for her voice. So this makes Ariel go up to the shore, sort of learns how to walk, bumps into Eric. Hi, I'm Prince Eric. Hi, She can't talk. So she has to get Eric to fall in love with her by a certain amount of time, otherwise she'll belong to Ursula. Now Ursula has this plan. Her plan is to get the prince to marry her so that she can have Ariel, so she can use Ariel to get at her father, so she can take his trident and become Queen Ursula of the Sea. So that kind of almost happens anyway, until Eric and Ariel basically kill Ursula, and then they marry and they have a baby called Melody. Now the Hans Christian Andersen version is completely different. So the small print, everything happens, but the small print in the agreement is that Ariel's legs will hurt all the time, as if she was walking on knives. Ouch. Since pain and seduction don't mix, the prince ends up marrying another woman. Ariel then throws herself into the ocean, where she turns into sea foam. That's actually heartbreaking and actually quite sad. Out of all the stories that I've done so far, that is probably one of the saddest ones, considering it's probably one of the happiest ones. It's kind of horrible when you think about the authors that actually wrote these stories before, and how mean they actually are, and how much Disney turns it into being really nice films. Wow, makes you think, doesn't it? Okay, next one is Mulan.
Hey! Think of instead a girl worth fighting for.
So Mulan basically starts off with the Huns coming to destroy China, and they all need to go out into war, you know, fight for a girl worth fighting for, and they basically head off and fight the Huns. Now Mulan's father, who used to be really, really high up in the army, can't really walk now without a stick. So Mulan says to him, you can't fight. And back in China, about that age, it was kind of like women don't speak, the men will do everything. So he says yep, and signs up. Now whilst he's asleep, Mulan grabs his armour, his sword and everything, and leaves.